me like 2 hours. Usually I don't speak that long, but let's see. All right. So good. I would like to invite you then to join me in the silent prayer. Amen. Good. So my topic, my intention is to speak about the vision or the understanding, the development of the understanding of the end. In theology, I think you would call it eschatology. This is a separate area of study, which is dedicated to the end time events. And I would like to share with you a kind of an overview how our understanding developed, but furthermore, how it came to how it came to its place. So this means that I would like to start in the time of the reformers of the 16th century and just give a little introduction and what were their thoughts, their vision, their understanding of end time events, and how this then would develop specifically in the Millerite view, then the Adventist, Seventh-day Adventist understanding, and finally in our movement in its first phase under the first messenger, and then how it developed further in the second phase under Elder Tess Lambert. So this is just the overview, and I hope you got an idea. All right. So obviously, Christianity always had ideas of the end, had a perception of end time events, since the Bible gave a lot of information on that. The Old Testament already, you have so much, you have specifically the book of Daniel, of course, but other books also. So the Jews had already an understanding of end time events, developed further, of course, in the New Testament with the book of Revelation and so on. But of course, this view also was taken then into the Roman Catholic understanding of end time events. But basically, I want to see how it developed in Protestantism and from that point onward. So if we think about Protestants, we usually think about Calvin, about Martin Luther, big reformers, and other names, basically the names that Ellen White shared with us in Great Controversy. But there are mainly two big streams, especially in regard of eschatology. We see that there are two main streams in the Reform movement or the Protestant movement, which is first the magisterial reformers, and let me share with you here, if I may, board. Okay, so we have here the Protestants. we have first the mainstream, which is called the magisterial reformers. These would include Luther, also Calvin, and Zwingli. So they had some different ideas on eschatology, on the end time events, but there are some things they had in common. And I'm just interested in to include this in our study because it helps us to see where many things that we believe come from. Yes, they already developed some ideas that we would deal with also. We are still dealing with. But the big thing was the idea of the 1,000 years, right? You remember that Adventists and Millerites, they dealt with it as well. Anyways, the 1,000 years, what does it mean? And basically there are three views. One view is that there will be 1,000 years before Christ's coming on earth, or there will be 1,000 years after Christ's coming on earth or in heaven. And then there's a third view, and this was basically the view of the Protestant, which is amillennialism. Amillennialism, which means there is no such thing as 1,000 years, literally. Yes. So they believe that there will be 1,000 years, yes, but in our hearts. So it's just spiritually, okay? And there's no literal 1,000 years on earth, but it's happening inside the people. So you also would call it like it's Christ reigning already, but he's reigning in the hearts of the people. So they had this amillennialist view. But they also had something which is called historicism. Historicism means that prophecy, Bible prophecy, is happening, or you can see Bible prophecy happening and fulfilled in history. So it's literally going on. You have Rome as a fulfillment of prophecy. You have Babylon, you have the kingdoms, you have the papacy. So all these things are happening literally. Millennialism, the 1,000 years are not happening literally, but many other events, yes, are happening literally in the history of the world. So this is something that they had in common, and they had a very specific understanding and idea of the Antichrist. So for them, the Pope was clearly, the papacy was clearly Antichrist. This was a very common theme among these magisterial reformers. The corruption of the church, all of that indicated something to them that this is the Antichrist of history. And for example, Martin Luther said, "I now hold and avow that the Pope is the Antichrist and that his throne is that of Satan himself." So that these three issues, or these three things they had in common, they're a little bit more. If you want to check, you see that we, as coming out of Adventism, we have a position on this one, of course, which is different. Yeah, we are not amillennialists. We have a historicist understanding of prophecy as well. Yes. We share the idea of the Antichrist. Yes. So it's nothing that we discovered or that Miller discovered or invented, so to say. Yeah, it's something that we took over. We continued these ideas from Protestantism. But there also was something, what we can say, caution on speculation. What would that be? Speculation is perhaps a little bit derogatory, the expression for making predictions about future events, okay? Especially about timing. So they had a very cautious attitude, let's say, rather not willing to predict anything, especially not regarding to time. Yeah, I haven't delved like deeper into this. I don't know exactly why they would have this position, but this is something common amongst magisterial reformers. Okay, so no predictions about timing, especially about Christ's return, and especially about future events. So I put here about the second advent and future events. We also can add the issue of timing. So they already had a very clear position, and of course you know that what then happened with William Miller is departing from this position is something that had to happen. So rather than, if you don't, what is prophecy then for, right? What are the ideas of the end times for if you don't want to use them or to play with them, trying to understand how things would happen in the near future? So it becomes rather something that is set aside, and you have a focus on the present life of the believer. So they say it's prophecy is not that important, in my words. Yes, it's not that important. It's interesting. It's good to have. It's there. It perhaps helps our faith, but rather than thinking about understanding what may come, what is going to come, because they believed in the second coming and so forth, but rather than investing time and investigation in that, we should emphasize our relationship with God and the personal present life of the believer. So as you can see, we have already a couple of issues here that are going to be issues. There are still issues, right? There are topics and questions that the church, being at the Adventist church, being at the Millerite church, being our movement, are still dealing with in one another form. So this is the mainstream of the Protestants. But I said that you have also a second stream, which is called the radical reformers. Also known as Anabaptists. So they had quite some different viewpoints, because yes, they had some apocalyptic and millenarian expectations. They believed that they believed there's a literal 1,000 years. All right. I don't know if they were pre or post millennialists. I think that they believed that Christ would come and then there would be 1,000 years, so which would make them pre-millennialists. Okay. And not only that, but this, or let's say this expectations oh, hope you can read that. Would also mean that it has to do something with them. Yeah, it includes them as believers. They are part of it. It's not something that it's remote to them. So they would see that they have to do some preparation. They have to do some adaptation to what is coming. Apocalyptic events are on the verge of happening. So they have to, it has implications for their lives. Okay. Which for many meant a separation from the world. And this could lead to some extremes. There is one group or one development which is called the Münster Anabaptists. Münster is a city in Germany. The Münster Anabaptists, they had a brief theocratic government established in the city of Münster. So many would literally believe that they had to separate, they had literally formed their own society, their own group, their own community, which is safe, like it's a safe place where they could live how it should be, and they should be try to separate literally from the world, which of course put them in a position that the world would regard them as extreme, as extremists, and this had consequences because they were persecuted. Persecution and martyrdom was part of their expectations. And well, once this happens, you have apocalyptic understanding, you have ideas of Christ coming crisis, and then as a people you are trying to adapt to this, and in your lifestyle and in your social organization, you are trying to prepare yourself for the second coming. And what then happens is that you're being persecuted, and you're producing martyrs. So this would, as you can see, develop into a climate understanding, a perception of end times events are already happening. Yeah, and they are very close to the tribulation. They are already entering into this predicted situation before Christ's coming. Just something remote to this, but you remember the Davidians, which had also this idea, right? They had these ideas of the trumpets, and there would be a persecution, and when they were being persecuted by the state, being attacked by the state in the United States, in Waco, then they would see that as a fulfillment of course, what they said would happen. Okay. What else? So another point I would like to add here, the last point, there was something that people call charismatic elements. Which means that they believed that they would receive direct inspiration, direct revelations from the Holy Spirit. Yeah. And which makes them instruments guided by God, instruments in the world guided by God directly through the Holy Spirit. So they also have this aspect already. And if you now have a look back to take all these things into account, even though the radical reformers are a minor, smaller, not so widespread, not so important group, still you already have many elements that show us. And I think in the view of the Great Controversy, God's children already are, of course, are looking for the truth, and they are trying to find, and they try to move into direction where they think there needs to be some development. All right, there's something it's not correct. So if you are part of the Protestant movement, and then you see that the leaders say, and then the movement basically says, prophecy is something remote, so no time setting, no predictions, let's focus on ourselves. So some people would say, okay, that's not correct. It doesn't seem how prophecy works, right? But then there is this movement of seeking for truth, as I would say. And even if some elements, or even is the way how they concluded at the end of the day, how they would understand prophecy is not correct, we don't see it as correct, I think that you can already see that they are going into the correct direction in its core idea, or basically, right? So if they believe they need to separate from the world, yes, we understand that that's correct. Of course, not in the way they understood it. Yeah, not literally in establishing communes or groups or your own theocratic state. Yes, but still, as you know, like separating from the big cities, living in the countryside, choosing friends, and etc. is something that we are very aware of. Also, the idea of persecution and martyrdom, and what's described here as charismatic elements. If you then see Ellen White, someone who had visions and dreams, it's something they would say is the very same thing that happened to them. All right. Good. So this is just a very brief, let's say, introduction on some elements are being worked on and are being worked out already in the Protestant Church. And then let's jump to the next big step, which is the Millerite view. Or are there any questions, perhaps, or comments you want to make right now regarding the Protestant understanding? Oh. Okay. So if you have this position in mind, basically Reformed churches don't believe in prophetic events the way that you could say, okay, they are happening, they're coming, we could see and we predict. You are aware of that in Protestantism, there's a lots of writers and leaders who experiment, right? Who try to understand, who try to develop ideas. And Miller is not set in a situation where he's the very first one speaking about prophetic end time events. Yeah, there's already speculation, there are already ideas, there's already a climate of thinking that Christ is near, something is happening, because you had, for example, you had the Lisbon earthquake. Yeah, you had some events that people recognized are things that maybe represent what the Bible predicted. Yes, there was an awareness of eschatological events, of end time being near, perhaps. So in this setting, in this time, but with all this attitude from the Protestant church, something had to happen, because we have God guiding his people on earth to understand what is true. And with Miller and the Millerite movement, you see that the issue of prophecy is something that had to be corrected. Yeah, they had to be understood. It became prominent. So first of all, yes, Miller had to develop and establish this idea of the year-day principle. Well, let me correct, he didn't develop this idea, but he established it. Yes, he completed it, and he made it very, very convincible. So people were convinced of this idea and how it worked, and that it worked, and how you have to deal with it. So based on this, on this idea of the year-day principle, then you could really handle time. So the first element is time setting. Yeah, you remember that William Miller was cautious on that he did not really want to be very clear about the second advent, that he had to be pushed by other people, right, that to finally say Christ is coming in 1843, etc. But he definitely did start to set times. And Ellen White remembers us that he handled different time periods. Yes, he handled the 2520, he handled the 1260, the 2300. And then you would prominently see that the Millerite movement, understanding time setting, had their first successes, right, when they established the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Okay, I would like to take advantage and just draw a quick line. So they understood 1798 being the time of the end. They understood 1840. And then basically what else, right? In regard to time setting, what the Millerites accomplished was not much more than that, I would say. Because the other dates that we understand, that we see in the time of the Millerites, were not dates that they were really understanding as waymarks, right? So they didn't establish the Midnight Cry waymarks prominently. Yes, there was Snow who came to understand. He was proposing that they're in the middle of the road, the middle of the way, etc. But this was not something that, well, it's, you can add it as part of this development, as part of what they understood. But in main terms, they only have this. Yes, October 22nd, and you have here August 11. So if you want, you can include the events of 1844, Midnight Cry, as time, that they would understand why it was happening, right? This is quite an important, of course, an important mark or frame of dates, because it does something that we have seen repeated in our history with our movement, to establish, first of all, the moment and the present day moment of end time events. So to say that all these things that the Bible is predicting are happening not only at some point in time, but just now, they are starting. This is something that was incredible and had a very strong impact, of course, was part of their success. Maybe you could add here 1833, the falling of the stars, something they were aware of also. But yeah, I would suggest this is basically what they understood. They understood the beginning and they understood the end, at least what they thought would be the end, what they thought would be the second coming or second advent. They had this rather big view and understanding of these events, but it's quite important, of course, and it's a major change in the development of an eschatological understanding of God's children. What allowed it to them to do that is that they were willing to set time, something that, as we have seen prominently, the reformers, the Protestants did not want to do. They were also clearly premillennialists. So they had a very specific understanding now on many points of end time events. They say, okay, premillennialists, Christ is coming before 1,000 years, literal, and then the kingdom will be established after that. So all of this in the Protestant world that is rejecting prophecy, basically. And now you have this movement, which has very clear and precise ideas, convincing logic, convincing ideas, and convictions about eschatology. This was very impactful. Yes, and it was important, and it was correct. Something that had been neglected for so long, which had been set aside, was now giving its rightful position. All right. So before we return a little bit on how they view things, and I would like to come to a conclusion on what was the focus. Perhaps you can start thinking about for yourself, what do you think was the focus, the most important thing they dwelled on in all their understanding of end time events? What was important to them about the end of time? Yes. What was the mission, perhaps, in this time? Why prophecy? And this is something that underlies my little study here with you. What is this all for, right? What is the knowledge about end times events for? What sense does it have? And maybe because the Protestants did not have a very good answer to this, they would say, okay, we can set this a little bit on the side because there's lots of speculation. It's not very clear. Let's focus on something that really matters, which is our personal relationship to Christ. Yes. So the Millerites, obviously, they had a different view, and they give it a lot of prominence. And it's of course it's known among Protestants that Millerites and then Adventism would have this focus on prophecy. I remember that once I was here in Bolivia in a shop printing out a chart, and then the owner of the shop, who also was a Christian, he asked me what church I'm from, and then he said, yeah, Adventists are, they are known, yeah, they are the people of prophecy. So he was meaning that they are the people, this is their like specialty. Yeah, they know about prophecy, others about other things, but what Adventists know is prophecy, right? Not that other churches don't have ideas on prophecy. Yes, of course they have. But it's like kind of something attached to Adventism, of course. Well, anyways, so keep this question in mind. And then what prophecy, what is it for? Why do we need to know end time events? What important it has? I want to come back to this question. And during the studies of these different groups and movements. But also, I would like to note here that they had even if Millerite movement in the eyes of the world failed, yes, if their predictions failed in the world's understanding, it still had a very strong influence or impact. It left, let's say, a positive impact, because in that time people were really, I would say, many wanted them to have success. Yes, this is my view of things. They liked people being now very specific and being almost mathematical about these events, something people felt had been neglected by the big Protestant churches. And now this group is very specific and can predict. This is something that's fascinating and people wanted to embrace. So even if there was this disappointment situation happening, many would continue to stick to these ideas. So they would not say this is all wrong, yes, but they would say there's something they have missing. You know, it's basically correct. Yeah, all the dates are correct, but they're missing something. And mainly the focus was on the calendar, the use of the calendar, some calculations, maybe around people recalculate the times. So so we have this contribution, let's say, to a broader pre-millennialist movement throughout Protestantism, yeah, in general. So you have reinterpretations. People saw it's correct what they say. It's basically correct, but they need to do again the calculations. Then you have also development, something that we've been speaking about in this movement, dispensationalism. Maybe you remember the name of Darby. This idea, which is greatly prominent today in evangelical circles, especially in the United States, and this idea with the rapture, the pre-tribulation period, the role of Israel, the role of the Jewish people, these ideas, yeah, the seventh mountain theology, and all the things that are kind of connected, this is something that could rise now, based upon the Millerite movement, basically. I don't say it came out of the Millerite movement, but it was somehow influenced by it, and it came to rise in following the Millerite movement in this time period. I think Darby, he died in the 1880s. Yeah, so he was contemporanean. So then the idea of pre-millennialism, the idea of this, that 1,000 years are before Christ coming, was spread among evangelicals. So you could say, okay, they adopted a correct understanding, yes, because many would either have as we saw, no conviction about 1,000 years literal, or they would believe that the 1,000 years are before Christ coming. But now many would adopt Miller's understanding in evangelical circles. Then you have the rise of prophecy conferences. It's not something only in Adventism. So you have this a lot now, lots of conferences, different schools here and there. And yeah, perhaps these are some points that I would like to put here as part of this development on the view of end-time events. But there's more to say about the Millerites, of course. So when I was thinking about the Millerites and what they contributed and what they understood about end-time events, basically they set a foundation that prophecy is something that you have to take seriously, that you have to incorporate in your Christian thinking, beliefs, something that that you can understand. It's not something impossible to understand. It can be part of and it has to be part of what a follower of Christ is studying and what he's believing. So they gave the foundation through the logic and framework of time setting. The methodology was set, so times could be set, and then they set times. And they probably had, of course, a success because they could attach these to time periods that are predicted, and they could make these calculations, and it would all fit and make sense. Nevertheless, when you think about this movement, or the Millerite movement, at least how I understand it, the focus was too extreme or too one-sided. There was only this view on trying to understand when Christ is coming. It was this method they got now was used basically only to do and to understand one thing: when is Christ coming? Yeah, because what's happening here is all basically focused on this. Yeah, it's all focused on this one point, on this one big event. And other than that, maybe I'm wrong, but at least looking back and using my little knowledge about what Millerite preached and said, course, they spoke about many topics and understanding of biblical doctrine, but what is their main issue? Yeah, their main focus was understanding when Christ is coming. Anything else was secondary, was placed on a second level. And and I think this can be defended by seeing into what Ellen White then contributed. Yeah, because she basically introduced so many other things, other topics that are important, other messages that are important to understand and to see. And it's not only about when Christ is coming. And if you have even this one single major event of Christ coming, even this, what else did Millerites contribute to this? Because one thing is to know that he's coming, and the other thing is, when I know it, what do I have to do, right? And I think that Millerites did not contribute very much to these questions, nor the question, why do I need to know it? Or the question, what do I have to do now, right? Basically, I think they thought that they already knew what they had to do. And this is something similar perhaps to the Anabaptists, just being ready, separate from the world and morally being ready. Just clean your life. Okay. I'm saying just, but I don't want to say that this is wrong. I don't want to say that this is not important, but my focus is on what they changed or what they contributed, and I think they did not contribute much, if anything, in that aspect. There was nothing they had to add what was not already in the toolkit that they had already with them, that they brought already from the Protestant churches. So it was basically what any Christian already knew: change your life, make it all good, come clear with God and the world. Already, everybody knew that, and the Protestants already had a focus on that. But now it was just hurry up. Now it's serious. Now you really have to do it. Now there won't be any further time to do these things that perhaps many of us have been postponing. Okay. So later you can say if you agree with me, but basically something that had been like left totally outside of Protestantism, the element of time setting, the element of predicting prophecy, predicting events, now becomes the main focus, and in my understanding becomes too much of a focus. Yes, so the balance is now, it's not even, but it's now swinging to one side only. It's only about time. It's only about, and it was of course so much of an element that when Christ did not come as they expected, October 22nd, October 23rd, did not come in 1844, it became such a thing that, as we already saw, people started to say, well, or either they were disappointed or they said, well, it cannot be wrong, And then we have new dates. And this is important for us because it has to do with Ellen White's intervention later on. Something that had such a strong impact in even in our movement, Adventist Church. And of course, you have first the seventh months movement. Which we remember contributed importantly to the Millerite movement and suggested the correct dates. Yes, Christ would not come in 1843. He would come in 1844. He would come then and then specifically, and why, and all of that. This logic was something that was developed inside the Millerite movement, because there was this first disappointment in 1843. The Cartwright calendar and all of these details. Then you have Christ didn't come neither, right? The 22nd of October, 1844, after the adjustment, the correct adjustment done by the 7-month movement. Samuel Snow, Christ didn't come neither. So for many, this was another failure, and it became known as the second disappointment. There's this Adventist preacher, or Millerite preacher, sorry, Jonas Wendell. He was a Millerite preacher, and he was then one in the list of people who then started to suggest other dates. He would suggest in the late 1860s. Yeah, and all of this, I didn't work it out. I didn't study all the details, how they came to these convictions, but they have the logic, right? And basically, as I said before, they reinterpreted the calendars, or the calendars that you should use in order to make these calculations. Sorry, by the late 1860s, he was studying chronology, and he came to the conclusion that Christ would come in 1868 or 1873, 74. Yes. So he would settle in a booklet that Christ would come in 1873. For us, just important that there were these new ideas on new dates. We have been talking about this before, and I don't remember that we have been very specific about, maybe it's not so important to know the names, etc. But, well, I want to make a point, and you'll see why. So even Miller, William Miller, he gave also a new date. And he would suggest later that the date of Christ's coming would be 1845. The next date, I have a little quote here. This is Darmstadt. He is saying, some Adventists, including James White, the younger James White, expected the time periods to terminate in the end of the Jewish year 1844, at the commencement of the next Jewish year, on the second day of the new moon, which would be specifically April 7th of 1845. Yeah, so this was an important date that was suggested by several, according to the Cartwright reckoning. It has to do with the Passover, the Great Jubilee, etc. Yes, so there were these, you see their prominent names: William Miller, James White. Let me then read a text by, which is from the Word to the Little Flock. Not sure if I can. Yeah, there we go. It is well known that many were expecting the Lord to come on the 7th month, 1845. That Christ would then come, we firmly believed. This is James White writing. A few days before the time passed, I was at Fairhaven, at Dartmouth, Massachusetts, with a message on this point of time. At this time, so he was preaching this message, James White. Then he says, at this time, Ellen was with the band at Carver, Massachusetts, where she saw a vision that we should be disappointed and that the saints must pass through the time of Jacob's trouble, which was future. Her views of Jacob's trouble was entirely new to us, as well as herself. So Ellen White is then intervening. She gets this vision and says, okay, forget about this. There's nothing going to happen in 1845. Yes. And this was an important, one of the important dates they established, still thinking that Christ would come on another date, right? There's also another Millerite teacher, Enoch Jacobs, who was editor of the Daystar. Do you remember this magazine the Millerite produced? And he would say 6 months after October 1844. Yeah. So this was more earlier. Of course, it's so 6 months after. So we come into 1845. Several were suggesting 1845 at some specific date. Then you have several time settings for 1845, but also 1846. Nothing happened in 1845 neither. Then 1847 were pointed out by several, making new calculations on how the 2300, the 1035 years would fit, doing some modifications and trying to find another date, another date that is the real date, because they were so convicted that everything was correct basically, but there was just a little point they missed, and so they had to recalculate. Then you have Hiram Edson, where he predicted 1850. And so he published this in 1849. So we are already like 5 years now after the event of 1844. And they are like basically every year there's a new date, there's a new suggestion, a new calculation, and the movement goes behind one man or the other. And then we come into the 50s. 1850, of course, is important in world history. And somehow they believe that something important is happening in 1850. Yeah. If we go back to our line, we mark 1850 in this line, not at the way they saw it, but we know it's on their line. And they understand, or many of them understand, something is going to happen there. They don't understand what's going to happen. They don't understand correctly why it's important, but they come to the conviction, and it's a bigger movement now. Yeah, it's a bigger movement now that something is going to happen. So there's basically a time setting episode. This is how it's called in Adventism, that broke out. And now we are speaking about the Sabbatarian Adventists. Yeah. So it's Joseph Bates now. And so it's interesting, right? You find all these important names. We had, just recapitulating, we have Miller, we have James White, we have Hiram Edson, we have Joseph Bates. You know, all these important leaders, all doing wrong suggestions, but they're sticking to the conviction that time setting is correct and the principles are correct, and basically everything was correct. Just we have to find to make the correct calculation. So there was this time period breaking out, and Joseph Bates suggesting 1851 autumn, 1851. He doesn't receive support by the mainstream, so to say. The Review and Herald did not support him. James White writes against it, and then you would see this. You will have a vision by Ellen White. Let me just pass it here. Okay, warning against those predicting the second advent in the autumn of 1851. The third angel's message needs not time to strengthen it. Ellen White, the Lord showed me that the message must go and that it must never be hung on time, for time never will be a test again. I saw that some were getting a false excitement arising from preaching time, that the third angel's message can stand on its own foundation and that it needs not time to strengthen it, and that it will go in mighty power and do its work and will be cut short in righteousness. I saw that some were making everything bend to the time of this next fall, that is making their calculations and disposing of their property in reference to that time. I saw that Hughes was wrong. For this reason, instead of that going to God daily and earnestly desiring to know their present duty, they looked ahead and made their calculations as though they knew the work would end this fall without inquiring their duty of God daily. So, and White intervenes again and basically sets an end to these speculations. Yeah, as I'm understanding merge history, after the first disappointment, the second disappointment, you have this development of time setting and of finding a new date and establishing a new date. And it's, as you can see, it's quite impressive because it seems like every year there was a new idea and prominent names engage in this. And White spoke already in, when was it? 45. Yeah, 1845. Now she speaks again. She has this vision the Lord showed me, she says, and then she makes it very clear that you can't do this. Yeah. Of course, you have simultaneously, you have now the understanding also within Adventists or Sabbatarians, because they're in the phase between Millerite movement and establishment of the Adventist Church. You have this conviction that October 22nd, 1844 was not wrong, right? So it was not wrong. It was correct. It was not just not that what they thought it would be. It was not a second Advent. Okay, so here, and I believe this is very helpful to set this quote in relation to the historic events. Yes, when she says needs not time to strengthen it, ask yourself, did at this point in time the third angel's message need time to strengthen it? No, it didn't. The time already did its work. Now, when people were trying to resurrect the importance of time setting and basically negating what had been set and what was correct, then you have this issue where Ellen White has to intervene and say, we don't need it. We don't, because it's not only not necessary, it's wrong. Because if you set new times, then you disregard the time that has been set. You disregard the correct setting of time of the date October 22nd, 1844, and the other dates connected to it. Okay, so in this necessity, in this development, Ellen White makes this statement. Lord showed me that the message must go and that it must never be hung on time, for time never will be a test again. So was it a test? Yeah, when she says it like this, it sounds to me that it was a test, but it will never be a test again. These texts are very important for Adventists, and they were very important to us too, and still are very important to us. Nevertheless, what happened in the post Midnight Cry message in our movement is that we, or around Midnight Cry movement, started earlier, started before that, continued after that, is that we came to understand that time setting is not wrong. Yes, it's not something that we can't do, and this is not what Ellen White is saying. She doesn't say it, but she says that the message cannot be hung on it. Yes, it's not a test again. And we'll come to this point, but I just wanted to insert this quote here and to put it in relation to the events. Okay. This is basically the end of the Mirat movement, trying to set times, establish times. She finishes it with 1850, with her 1850, 1851, with her statements. And since then, Adventists took a very clear position regarding time. But before we go there, let me try to make a kind of a conclusion on what is the focus. Maybe you've thought about it. What is the focus of Millerites, of the Millerites in regards to their message, and specifically the end times? I think I would say it, as I would say it, the message of the end times, there was a shift to time. Yeah, something that had been neglected by the Protestants, set aside, basically forbidden by Protestants. But if we include the Mirat movement or the Sabbatarian movement to the times pre-establishment of the Adventist Church, let's say all this time after 1840, after 1850, after 1860, so there's more, right? There's more. And we can see that Ellen White brings in her weight, for the Lord God is doing a work, that this movement now starts to understand that there are other things they need to focus on, they need to understand. They don't have everything understood. And it's not only time, a gift, a correct understanding they had, but it's more. Yes. So when we have in the 1860s Ellen White's intervention and her messages regarding slavery, there was a very black, a dark side of humanity, a big sin, a huge sin, which was sitting within this church, within this movement. And they were not aware of it, right? They were thinking they were ready for Christ's coming, that they had the tools in their hand. They understood the time, they understood the event, and they were just getting ready for it. They didn't see that they had this huge issue to overcome and to resolve. And I would say this is in terms of the character of Christ. Yes, the Adventist movement very late, now the Adventist, the Millerite movement very late came to understand that there's more than time, but there's also some other things they need to understand and to overcome and to change. I just put it here as the character of Christ. There was a focus on that. And important, very early in this Millerite movement, and very early, by that I mean already here, 1840, Millerites understood that they cannot neglect what's happening outside the church. In other words, they had to focus, they had to learn and to remember to focus on external events. When you remember what we saw about the Protestants, they left aside basically what's going on. Yeah, they understood the papacy, but this was enough basically for them. Other than that, there was no focus. There was not incorporating of studying, of understanding what was going on in the world. And the Millerites did, yes, focus on external events. But kind of too short, yes. They basically use external events just for their aim, just for what was their focus, Second Advent. Once they got enough information from outside on what they needed to know, what they wanted to know, when is Christ coming, then basically they blacked it out again. Yeah. There was no further understanding on external events as we have worked out in this movement. Neither regarding what was going on in American politics, which has to do with slavery, which has to do with the war in the United States, Civil War. There was nothing that they would make a message of. Yeah, they would understand, they would study. They got it right for a short period of time, and then they blacked it out again. And yeah, so let me know what you think, or think for yourself. What do you think was their focus? Think if you can agree with my conclusions. But since this recording started, or since the time of this meeting started before we started to record, can someone let me know just how long I have been going? We started 1 hour and 20 minutes, right? Something like that. So maybe I just give a little idea of what's coming then for the next presentation. But I'm going to conclude briefly this first set of topics. So my idea was to study about the development of our vision of the end. It has to do with the question, why are we even studying eschatology? Why are we even studying end time events? What is it for? What is our focus on? And how is the development anyway? So I started with the Protestant movement. We have seen that there are two main schools or main movements: the magisterial reformers, the main reformers, who had, if I can say, in essence, they had some ideas on prophecy. They did not neglect prophecy, but they came to a conclusion that they need not and should not speculate or study or think about the second advent specifically, neither in regards to time, nor in regard to future events. Then you have the radical reformers who had different understandings. They had a very present day conviction of prophecy. They thought things were already starting to happen. They were already part of it. They had premillennialist convictions. For them, prophecy, apocalyptic events were important, but I think they still got into very wrong ideas and directions, because basically they took it very literal. Many things they thought things would happen already. They had to establish a community of people who are already separated from the world. They saw themselves in persecution. They applied this to their time, and they mix it with the understanding of prophecy. Then you have the Millerite movement, which introduced again the element of time and stuck to this. And I think basically, and why I tried to help them to change, she corrected the movement, but they had a hard time to overcome what for them was disappointment in 1843, 1844. And they tried to set times, and they've become so focused on this that they lost sight of many other things. They lost sight of external events, which they already had embraced in the very beginning of the movement. They lost sight of other things than this focus on time. And it took them a while to be able to shift and to understand the other things they need to understand that are important. And they had to develop the character of Christ. And well, towards the end of the Millerite movement, they made these changes, and they to the help of Ellen White. So the next basically part would be the Adventist view. An Adventist view, I start, of course, 1863 up to today. Adventists, they incorporate eschatology into their beliefs. We have the 28 fundamental beliefs. Adventists developed a new understanding of the heavenly sanctuary. And in relation to this, the investigative judgment. This point is a very important point because it's something that no one else has. Yes, other Christian churches don't have this understanding. It's an Adventist development and understanding that Christ is doing the work of investigation in the heavenly sanctuary. Other points like second coming, yes, they are part of the fundamental beliefs. There's a resurrection and all of that. The view on the millennium didn't change. So that didn't change very much. But what will be important, and I suggest we start with this the next presentation, the next hour, is what do Adventists now do with the heritage of prophecy? Okay. Okay, I need to add also the Sabbath here, of course. The discovery of the importance of the Sabbath and its role in prophecy is another very important point of Adventist view of the end times. So I want to work out a little bit, what did Adventists do with the heritage of the understanding of end time events? What do they do with time setting? Yeah, and what is their focus? And of course, then why did this movement need to change? Basically, all of that, or many things, how they relate, how Adventist Church relates to prophecy. All right. So I think 1.5 hours, I'm done with my first part. So if this is okay, then we finish here. Are there any comments or questions? If not, I leave it to you then to finish off.
I have a question. Marco, can you hear me?
Yes.
My question is, the Millerites, their distinguishing mark was that they were time setters, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why would you think Ellen White in 1850 would kill that spirit? And it seems like she effectively.
I heard you well in the beginning. I don't hear you anymore.
Oh, let me see. I'm sorry. My volume is up as loud as it can go. Can you hear me?
I hear you well now.
Okay. I was saying time setting, that was a novel thought you brought, how time setting was the Millerites' distinguishing mark. And the reason all these prominent speakers that stood up weren't called evil and just totally denounced by that movement was because they were still upholding that distinguishing mark that we're time setters, and the principle of time setting is correct. It's just our calculations are wrong. And in the climate of also, they were still trying to hold true to that principle, as I thought you were saying. But then Ellen White comes in and kills that in 1850 by saying time is no longer going to be the test. And it seems like she killed their chances of seeing the true 1863 second coming time, right? Because if they were still time setting and this is 1850, maybe they would have stumbled upon 1863 as a time that Christ could have truly come in their time. But since Ellen White in 1850 said no more time, it like totally threw them off from ever time setting again, right? So I'm wondering, why would that happen?
Yeah, my opinion, is that give me just a second. Forgot how I stop screen sharing. Okay, here we go. My opinion is that you don't have to set times. You don't have to understand the time for everything. You can understand that the end is coming, but it's not so important that you know the date for it, or the specific date, or that you need it in advance, or with enough time in advance. What would it change? Yeah, if you would understand that certain events are happening and these events are part of the final test, these events are that have to happen, or these topics have to be dealt with and have to be decided. You have to come to a conclusion, an opinion on that. Then you're ready, right? It doesn't make a change if you know it's this very day that this is the closing line. So I think the time was important because it woke them up. Yeah, they were sleepy. It woke Protestantism up. They were aware now that the end is happening, but this was enough. This was the work accomplished. They didn't have to know that it was on this day. So this is my opinion. You need to understand what you need to understand. You need to make the changes that you need to do. But other than that, then you're good. I don't know if this answers your question, but I just don't see why it would be so elementary, so decisive for them to have in advance knowledge of a specific date.
Okay, I understand you now. So like you're saying, and she was saying, it was a test to wake them up. It wasn't really an announcement that Jesus is coming.
Yeah, because it is something that they had neglected, right? Protestantism had decided against time setting, and this was
Right.
wrong. Because you need to understand about time. It's okay to set times. It's important, yeah, but it's not all important. It's not the only thing. Once you say I'm good with time setting, I like it. It's correct. It's true. We know how to do it. That's it. And you have done it. It's the test you needed to see, and you needed to wake up to this. And the Lord, if He chooses so, He can use this element and work with you and help you. As you remember in our movement, sometimes we set way after the event that happened. Sometimes we set before the events happened. And sometimes we set during the event was happening. So I understand that the Lord is using time if you're willing to see it, but it doesn't have to be always in this logic of, clearly in advance the day of a certain event.
Thank you, Elder. You made it crystal clear. God bless.
All right, you're welcome. Any other comment, question?
I have a question and a contribution. A contribution, I think what time setting did before they started setting time, like the end of the world was something that you can't actually put like in a certain period. Probably the Protestants could view it like something that will happen probably in the future, very far. And what time setting did, it had to put the end of the world in a specific setting or a period of time. And once it did its party, I think the Millerites were actually aware that the events that they were expecting were supposed to take place in that period of time, which actually time setting helped them to see. Yeah, and after 22 October, I think they knew that all the events they are supposed to take place within this period of time, which is the time of the end. And time setting helped them to do that. Then afterward, when the message was opening up, they were supposed to pay attention to other things that God was talking about. And instead of doing that, they started going back to look for like the dates and paying attention more to time when time has already done its intended purpose. Yeah. Then a question is, was it right for the Adventists to like just focus on the second Advent? Even like before 22 October, their main focus was on the second Advent. Yeah. After 1840, probably I think they stopped even paying attention to external events and their main focus was just about the second Advent. Was it right for them to do that?
This is a question, it's rather a statement, right?
The question.
Yeah, I think that you kind of said it already, right? Or your answer is implicit, but I think it's not right. It wasn't right, because spiritual gifts, you see that Ellen White is giving a message, and it has to do with external events. End time events have to do with external events. She stirs up this question in Adventism regarding social issues, society issues that are discussed and are tearing apart United States society. And she presses Adventists basically to take a stand, to take a position on slavery. Yeah, so I think while they understood external events, these are things that you see that Protestants did wrong. They took a wrong stand on these issues. And Adventism, or the Millerite movement, corrected these things. This is part of their what's happening in the reform line. Yeah, this is part of what God does when he raises the reform movement. They have to correct the errors of before. So they corrected these errors, but just they did not finish this work, right? Their vision was very short-sighted, and they stopped in the middle, basically, as we come to understand it, right? In the middle way mark, they already finished the race in their understanding. They still had a way to go, but they didn't have the breadth to go there. Yes, because they had set aside all the elements they needed. They only hung on time now, but the things that were coming, they didn't need time. And they set aside external events so that they couldn't see what was happening. So the second half of the movement was powerless because they didn't have the elements they needed to. And what was trying, and she was pushing, but the acceptance was not there.
Thank you.
Anyone else? So if we go into the next study later on, just trying to remind you again to think about what is Adventists' focus, if they specifically regarding end-time events, eschatology. What do they expect from, and what is it for? And what do you expect from end-time events? What is it for? Yeah, why do we need to know about this? You see that Adventists, the Millerites, they had an understanding, yeah, of end-time events. They had a very clear understanding. It was the main issue, the main point, yeah, end-time events. And still, they did not understand it correctly, and it was not enough what they understood about it. And their focus was too short. So you can see that in our movement, there is again, it's a repetition of Millerites history. You see, we will see again when we study this in the afternoon later on, that there was a focus placed on and on the very same things, end-time event, Christ coming, time of the end, last generation, and so forth. But is this all? Is it enough to just know that we are there? It's happening now. Is this all? And well, I want to leave you with a thought, and maybe you can come to your own opinion on this question. I then invite you for a closing prayer. Heavenly Father, we praise you in this morning. We thank you for the Sabbath day that we have. We thank you for all this information that you left in our reach. Help us to come to good conclusions and to a right understanding, because all of this is not an exercise, an intellectual exercise. It's meant to help us to control our development, our understanding, our attitude, and our actions, so that we understand what you expect from us. In Christ's name, we praise you and we thank you for this beautiful day and for the meeting that we can have here over this distance. Amen.